So, second week of sociology class. 1 week is already gone, right? If y'all are counting down to Christmas, I am. No, I'm counting down to Christmas. Anyways, so last week, the only thing that we should have done is just got the bare bones minimum of the foundations of sociology. You should have in your notes the difference between macro and micro level sociology. So what is that? What is large scale, small scale, but what does large scale, small scale mean? Yeah.
Micro being like, for example, something between me and Ian.
Yes. So the interpersonal communication that you two have right here, yes, would be micro level, and what? Macro is big groups. You're on the right track, but that's not big enough. Because what does big group mean? And as a matter of fact, we don't have this vocabulary word yet, but in chapter 4, we're going to talk about social groups, right? Macro scale, if you think of the word group, put an ing on it. Put groupings on it. Macro scale. Society level. So for instance, people who live in the United States, or one of my favorite Spanish words, estadounidenses. People who live in the United States would be a macro scale grouping of people. People in the United States between 45 years old and 55 years old. There's a big grouping that macro scale sociology would be interested in. And what do you want to say? Those same things? Okay, society as a whole, or a huge chunk of society. So not just groups in society, but a huge chunk of society, like millennials. Huge chunk of society. Yes?
If he and I would be micro, would the classroom be macro, or that would still be too
Good
small?
question. I was about to get to that. So the question is, if just two people sitting in a desk talking is micro, would the classroom be macro? What do y'all think?
No.
No, not based on what we just said. This is still small scale communication. That I will probably, and I try definitely to make eye contact with every single one of you, every single day, multiple times, but you won't. You might recognize these faces because maybe you have more classes with them up and down this hallway, or biology or something, or some other class in some other building, but you won't have necessarily interaction with everybody in this classroom, right? And however, if you wanted to say college students in the United States, there's you a macro level, right? Because I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands probably of people who are in a 925 Monday, Wednesday class right now, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday class right now across the United States, right? Or online students or whatever, right? So that would be a macro scale grouping, but not even really UAPTC, not even the North Campus where we are right now, or main campus, whatever we call this place, or the South Campus, or even all those things put together is really not what we are focusing on in this introductory class. I got to get y'all to zoom out and see the much broader picture. So macro scale stuff is trends across the board of a population, like you said. So kindergartners in the United States. There's a macro scale group, because I don't know how many there are, but one of my grandchildren is one right now. This is his first day. Got pictures this morning. So backpack on. There's tons of those people. There's tons of social issues that affect what the curriculum is going to be that all of them are exposed to today, and then all the way through their semester, right? And all 12 years worth of or 13 years, I guess, with a kindergarten of grade school and secondary school, right? Okay. So you should have macro and micro. Hopefully that clarified things really quick. I want to clarify the micro and the macro because I did not ask you all to write anything for me in class on the Wednesday of last week. because y'all seemed to participate well and to pay attention and communicate with me when I asked you a question. We had some good discussions. I have another class that doesn't like to do that. I got a whole bunch of shy people in that class, but I still need to know what those shy people are thinking. And so I asked them to write me write me the difference between this and that. I gave them a scenario and I asked them to write it, and they were super good. All of them were super good at micro scale stuff. They were super good at giving me relevant, on point, micro scale issues having to do with the topic I gave them. But the macro scale stuff was still way too micro. It didn't even approach macro scale stuff. And that's not, so in case that is an issue with all my classes, I'm gonna review that a little bit, because honestly, I've noticed that throughout all the years of teaching sociology. Anyway, one of the most difficult things to do, especially early on in the semester, like we're only in week 2, one of the most difficult things to do is zoom out enough to get macro level thought processes, right? You've got to zoom out enough. And you have to have that macro scale way of thinking. You have to know how to shift between micro level and macro level, or personal issues and social issues. Are those 2 words that we used in class on Wednesday? Personal issues and social issues, micro and macro. Why do you need to be able to do both of those really well? What do those 2, social issues, personal issues, what do those 2 buzzwords go with specifically, a specific concept? You can look in your notes. They go with the sociological perspectives, they do. We haven't gotten to that phrase yet. We're going to do that today. We're going to do sociological perspectives today, or get started. But what's the major concept that our first learning outcome in this class wants you to develop over this semester? Sociological imagination, right? The sociological imagination is not about make-believe, it's about critical thinking, okay? The first major point thing that you're going to get, the 25-point group activity that you're going to get, the first one that you have is I'm going to ask you to use your sociological imagination to evaluate a situation. I'll give you a situation, you'll take it home, you'll think about it, you'll come to class, you'll do small groups, or if you're online, you're going to post your ideas on a discussion board or a blog, whichever one I set up, and you're going to share ideas and communicate with each other about your thoughts and kind of hone your ideas. But the sociological imagination is not about make-believe, it's about your ability to make connections. It's about critical thinking. It's about putting information together. Micro-scale experiences, macro-scale issues that affect those micro-scale. So did we talk in this class about a concept called the feminization of poverty? Did we a little bit? Okay, I saw no's and I saw yeses, so okay. So in case we didn't, the feminization of poverty, anytime there's a zation on the end of something, it means it's like a process, an increasing trend, okay? We're interested in trends across the board from the macro scale in sociology. So the feminization of poverty is a trend that we have observed, we sociologists, social scientists. The feminization of poverty, I see some of y'all writing, that's a good idea, I'll write it too. So you spell it this way. The feminization of poverty, okay? What's the word feminine mean? Females, we're talking about women here. What's poverty mean?
Poor.
Yes, poverty means,
That was very strict.
well, I mean poor, but poverty means, I know what you mean. Poverty means you can't have the basic standard of living. You don't have the assumed standard of living that everybody in a specific area, here's my air quotes, should have, right? Okay, so poverty, you lack the assumed standard of living. That's what poverty really is. You lack the assumed standard of living. Later on in the semester, I don't remember what chapter it's in, but later on in the semester after midterm, we're going to really take this word poverty apart and look at the different kinds of classifications of poverty that we have around the world on a global scale and right here in North Little Rock, Arkansas. But for now, we have just a really general idea about what we mean when we say poverty. Are you taking notes on your phone or are you texting somebody? Okay, put it down. I'm jealous. I want you to text me right now. Okay? So pay attention. You need this stuff. You need this stuff to do well on your first 25-point exercise, and I want y'all to do well because that's another reason I will find you and beat you up. You don't do well, okay? I'm giving everything you need to do well, okay? So pay attention and get it. This is not a gym membership that you pay for it and don't get it, okay? All right, so this, of course, means that we're talking about females and females being in poverty. So the feminization, this is a process of more females being in poverty since the 1970s in the United States. Here's a trend, since the 1970s, when some of your grandparents were born, maybe. So I'm not old enough to be your grandmother, not yet? Good. Good answer. Extra credit. I'm just kidding. Anyway, yeah, so females, since the 1970s, more of them are likely to live under the assumed level of standard of living in this country than any other group. Here's a macro level statement. Females. I don't know how many females are in the United States. Adult females. I don't know. We got 350 million people in the United States. I don't know how many of them are females over 20 on their own, maybe caring for kids or most likely caring for kids. But are we talking about millions? Yeah. Yeah, hundreds of millions, yeah. So females are more likely to live in poverty than any other group, especially when they're taking care of small children, dependent children. So the sociological imagination, just this definition of this concept here that we're talking about, the feminization of poverty. Females are more likely to lack standard living expectations than any other group. There's a micro-level experience that is caused by macro-level social issues that I think we talked about in class on Wednesday.
I think we touched it.
What are those macro-level social issues that affect women's income? Sir?
Gender differences.
Gender differences. There's a macro-level statement. Gender ideas about gender differences, gender roles. I remember somebody said, what's your name with the cap? Mallory said it. I remember specifically. She used that macro-level concept, gender roles, okay? So because of gender roles, we have concepts like when I say these two words, which I think are opposite of each other. I think these two words are opposite of each other. And you tell me who pops in your head immediately when I say caregiver and breadwinner. Female for both? Or female for caregiver, male for breadwinner? I don't want to put thoughts in your head. Is that what popped in? Okay. Is that reality most of the time?
No.
No, I mean, a lot of times, especially here, because we can observe this trend, this person is doing both of those things. But still, the books that my grandson is going to have his kindergarten teacher read to him this semester is going to have mommy and daddy. With daddy going to work and mommy going to the grocery store and picking out healthy food and going home and cooking it. And feeding the goldfish, too. So these ideas, and that's a great book. I'm glad that the kindergartner is going to read him that book. But that book comes from this much bigger, out of our control concept. Out of our control. Much bigger, out of our control issues about our ideas about caregiver, breadwinner, male-female roles in society. So there's the connection between the two. If you are a single female taking care of young children and you are depressed and stressed out and have anxiety attacks because it's so difficult, is it because that individual that personal issue remember the word we said, personal level issues versus social issues? Is that individual having anxiety, feeling low self-esteem, low self-worth, like she's not good enough? Those feelings, are they really her own, or has society kind of created a situation in which she has no choice? Because society standards on the macro scale that we have much less control over within our lifetime than we think.
That's when we go back to, do we control every decision that we make?
That's exactly where we go back to, do we control every decision, or continue that statement and say, are we in control of every life experience? Because I would love to say, heck yeah, I am. Yes, I pay my bills, I do this, I do that, I make this choice. But I'm still confined by the shape of the social facts of society, the shape of the social structure in general, the norms, the values that other people place on me. Right? Okay. So we got it? Questions? Thoughtful face.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. I like thoughtful faces. I just was waiting for the question that must be
No,
on the
it's
right.
not.
No, you're
It
good.
wasn't a question.
You have a
It was-
comment?
I
Give
was
it to me.
thinking when you asked the question about is she facing more personal problems versus societal problems, I felt like it was a mixture of both.
That's exactly what the sociological imagination wants us to do, is see that it's a
Oh,
mixture of
okay.
both. See the connection between those things. Because heck yes, reality is extremely real for her. That's her reality. But is she in control of determining that reality 100% within herself? Or has society determined, before she was even born, set up the structure that she's going to have to exist within? Has society set up the structure so that that was going to be her life experience if certain things fell in place?
Yes.
Does that make sense? Okay. No? Talk to me. Or somebody else pipe in and say, expand on that, or make it like, sometimes my sentences are like 47 words long and I don't even have a comma in them. So, so somebody else pipe in. Yeah. No? But when you have like a question that you do want to say, you'll say it, right? Good. Okay. Okay. We're good? Okay. So, every single day of this semester, we are going to get information, basic, just first, knowledge level information. We're going to start with the knowledge level because I'm assuming that y'all come in here with lots of different levels. Some of you already know a whole bunch of things and ask about correlations in research and stuff in the classroom. And others of you are like, I will probably misspell the word sociology when I have to write it in a sentence, right? And everything in between. And that's fine, okay? So I'm going to talk to the people who misspell sociology in a sentence, like I do, by the way, still. I'm a terrible speller. I write too fast. I'll just leave a letter out. I won't even notice. So if I do that on the board, y'all please tell me. Sometimes I leave out like whole syllables of things on the board. As a matter of fact, let me just tell on myself a little bit. So here's a simple word to spell, right? Do you know how I spell it sometimes if I'm going too fast when I'm writing it down?
O-V?
O-V-E. Not a joke. Not a joke. As far as I know, this is not an English word. But like I hope it's not some like really bad vulgar word. I don't know. But sometimes if I'm going too fast, I very well could have written that right there. And I would not notice, and you will have to tell me. As a matter of fact, the only way I know this example is because one time I did this in a class, and a student stopped me and asked me what the meaning of this new vocabulary word was. Not joking. So there is no shame in not being able to spell, but let's help each other when we don't, when we don't know how. And sometimes I will go too fast. My apologies. You'll have to stop me. I need you to stop me because I don't want like my dean or my department chair walking by and seeing these imaginary words on the board. Okay, so please fix it for me. Okay, any other comments or questions about what we talked about last week? We're going to springboard from that and continue getting information that we need to be able to hone and get our skills to do our sociological imaginations or to use our sociological imaginations. So y'all talk to me while I'm erasing if you want to. We're good? Okay, good. Stop me at any time if you need to ask a question. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the sociological perspectives. So a perspective is a what? A point of view. Exactly.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Feminization of poverty also be considered a sociological perspective, or?
No, good question. Well, let me tell you what sociological perspectives are, and then you can answer it yourself, I think.
Okay.
I think you can answer that question. Okay, so there are a lot of vocabulary words throughout this semester that start with the word sociological. Sorry. So I don't have a trick to keep them all straight. But the sociological imagination has a specific definition, and sociological perspectives have a specific definition. Okay, so I don't. If anybody develops a trick to try to remember that, please share it with the rest of us. Okay, so sociological perspectives. These are a perspective in general is a point of view, right? A perspective in general is a point of view. So sociological perspectives are ways of interpreting information about society and human interaction. Is this in your way? Okay. Make sure that it's charging up. Okay, so in other words, or I'm talking too soon, sorry. So I wrote 3 buzzwords on the board over here that I think we wrote last week in our little ugly concept map. When I went back and looked at it, it's really messy concept map. But anyway, so what do these 3 buzzwords go with? The definition of sociology itself. Absolutely. These 3 buzzwords have to be in your sentence or sentences in order for your definition of sociology itself to be valid and correct. Okay? Those are the 3 buzzwords. Okay, I'm putting these buzzwords up here right now because you can see that 2 of them are in our description of what the sociological perspective is, right? Okay. And are there supposed to be 2 T's in that word? No. See? I already did it. So anyway. Yeah, Siri has to tell me these things. Okay. Yeah, it looks better now. It looks right. It looks correct now. I don't know. Anyway, y'all spell it correctly. Okay? So, they are ways of interpreting information about society and human interaction. Now, this information part, this might not be as obvious as the other 2 words that are repeated verbatim in our description here. But the information part here is directly linked to this word systematic. What did we say that word systematic meant last week? Did we discuss it very much?
Facts.
This systematic thing, yes, I'm glad that you looked at the concept map and gave me that word, because when I was reviewing that video that we made, I think I shouldn't have used the word facts. It might have, go ahead and step over if you need to. It might have confused you with the concept of social facts that we discussed, and the concept of like data collection. research and data collection, because that word facts on your concept map, I really should have said observations. It really probably should say observations about the macro or the micro level issues you're studying, okay? So it's systematic because it's observations collected from research. Collected or made, concluded during research. So remember, we said that sociology is a social science because we are doing research. We're not just sitting around guessing how stuff maybe kind of is. Yeah, that sounds good. It's probably that way. We don't say that. That's not valid. It's not reliable. That doesn't get us anywhere. In order to know that the feminization of poverty has happened, for instance, to use that example that we just did. So I told you that the feminization of poverty is a trend for more women to be in poverty since the 1970s. Sociologists, social scientists, policymakers have collected information over those however many years it's been since they started, and they've noticed, okay, poverty, more people are in poverty. Who is most represented in that? Hey, it's women with children. And let's collect. So for this 5 years, there was a whole lot of women with children, with single parent households in this poverty group. Let's look at the next 5 years. Hey, there's even more women with children. Hey, there's even more. The trend is going up over time. So they looked at data that was already there, census data, and information like that. They did what's called a secondary analysis. You'll read it in your textbook, the second half of your textbook. And they gathered this information and said, hey, there is a trend where women are overly represented in the population of people living in poverty when those women have children. And so we're going to use that example to look at different points of view about that observable piece of information, that observable piece of data. You can use the word fact, just don't get it mixed up with the concept of social facts that we discussed on Wednesday. Yes, sir. Sorry I made you wait. What was your question?
Would we be able to expand on that?
We're about to.
Okay.
You mean the collecting the data?
Well, you were going on about the feminization of poverty.
Yeah, so I'm going to use, since we started out with that topic right now, I'm going to use that to talk about the perspectives or the different points of view you can have for that. Is that what you're asking?
Sort of.
Okay, stick with me, and if you have a more pointed question in a second, just speak up. Okay? All right, so, So let's start with sociological perspective number one. I'm only making this number one because it's the oldest one, kind of. This is the longest lived sociological perspective. Okay, so one point of view that sociologists can use. You don't have to use it. I don't have to use it, but many sociologists do. It's one way of looking at some information that we know is a factual observation or data that we can rely on to be true. Okay? So this first one is called functionalism. Functionalism. Functionalism is a macro scale point of view. So it looks at the big picture. Big picture. Okay. Functionalists look at society like it is a machine. Lots of different parts in that machine working together to make it function, if you want to see the connection between that word. Society is like a machine, or another metaphor. Is that a metaphor or a simile? I can't remember.
That'd be
That's a simile?
Yeah.
Okay, so another Okay, so another simile for society from a functionalist perspective that I've seen often is society is like a body or an organism, because we have a lot of different parts inside our body that have to work together in an orderly manner, a predictable, orderly manner for us to be stable, to use a medical term, stabilized, right? So obviously, society is like a machine. Think of your car and all the different parts in your car, and they all have to work together in the same time, in the purpose for which they were designed, or your car messes up, right? Okay. So society is like a machine. That's what this part means. So give yourself a little explanation in your notes about what this statement means. Functionalists look at society like it's a machine. Think about the machines that you know of, or think about the organism like the human body, if you want to use that simile instead of this simile. There's lots of different parts to a machine that have to be connected together correctly and have to kick in when they're supposed to for the machine to work okay. Just like the human body has lots of different parts, like the heart, the lungs, the intestines, etc. All those things have to be hooked up correctly and kick in when they're supposed to, or your body's not going to function correctly. Okay? So make sure you write a little bit more in your notes than just this, because you might not remember what the heck she was talking about when you're looking at it on your own later. Yes, ma'am. Yes, it won't be exactly the same words. But yes, you need to write some kind of explanation in your notes like this. Like every machine has multiple parts. The machine itself is a whole thing, but it's got multiple parts in it. And those parts are put together in a way that they have to be there, for the whole thing to work like it's supposed to function like it's supposed to. So society is like a machine. It has parts. Society is like the human body. It has parts. Your heart's not going to work if it's not hooked up to all the circulatory system, right? It's got to be, or you're dead, right? Okay. So that's the way functionalists look at it. Functionalists don't really criticize, or what's the word I want? Functionalists look at these machines or these bodies that you want to call, society. Functionalists look at society as a stable thing that kind of has everything in equilibrium according to the social facts that exist. Okay?
Say, like, we'll acknowledge like one part isn't working how it's supposed to.
Yes. Yes. If there's something not working like it's supposed to, then the rest of society, if your body is not working like it's supposed to, you've got a heart arrhythmia or something, right? Or you get migraines or something, you're not supposed to have this unstabilizing thing about you. You're going to try to go get help to fix it. So a functionalist would identify, hey, here's a social problem that's causing some issues. Let's try to patch it up. Or I told you my husband is an amputee, right? Part of his body cut off. We don't just leave him like that. We've propped him up on a prosthetic limb, so he still walks around just like all of us. Got pants on, you wouldn't tell at all, right? So he's still functioning normally because we patched him up, but we couldn't leave him like he was because he wasn't the same body that he was before. So if something is so broken that it gives you a different body or a different society than it was before, absolutely a functionalist would be like, we need to find a patch for this. We need to find a fix for this.
Everything's fixable?
Everything is fixable. Yes, I think a functionalist would say yes. Everything's fixable, but if it ain't broke, don't touch it. Don't fix something that is working predictably, working and make it and everything else is built up around it because it works that way. Don't fix something that's not really a deadly problem. Mallory, you had your hand up too?
I just said kind of like engineers. They fix things. They fix problems. You have a problem.
But a functionalist doesn't. I think an engineer is like trained to go in and like do stuff right away. Like functionalists, no, is like much more laid back than that. Like they're not gonna. They don't want an engineer to touch anything. You're not going to take your cell phone to the cell phone repair shop if there's nothing going wrong with it. So a functionalist likes it when there's nothing going wrong with it. And a functionalist says, you know, the reason nothing is going wrong and everything is working predictably, the reason is that that's the way the machine is put together. So we're not going to mess with the machine.
Would the same thing apply to someone who has a mental disability?
Okay, we're not going to talk about somebody with a mental disability in sociology class not because they're not valid to talk about, but because remember on first day or second day, we said that we are not interested in the bizarre, unusual circumstance, like maybe your psychology teacher is going to. In psychology class, especially abnormal psychology, I think you're going to spend like your whole semester doing that kind of stuff, right? Anybody had that? Yeah. Yeah. So on a micro scale, we can talk about how does your household have to negotiate reality based on the fact that you have somebody in there that fits that description, right? But as far as, and there are sociologists who are studying like what macro scale issue in society, is there a macro scale issue in society that causes, how did you put it, mental disability? There are people who study that. And as a matter of fact, I think it was in your reading assignment, your first 9-page reading assignment, studies about suicide. The founder of this theory, this perspective, his name is Emile. It's a fellow. This is a French name. Emile Durkheim is his name. He's like the father of functionalism. He did a major study on suicide that you can read about, parts of it, you can read about in the first couple pages of your textbook. He made a connection. He used his sociological imagination. He looked at the macro pressures and really shortcomings of society, like problems in society. That caused the micro scale example that makes somebody choose suicide. So he looked at society as a machine that had all its parts working together like it should be working together. He noticed that sometimes society's structure, the norms and the social facts that exist on the macro scale and affect all of our lives on the micro scale, that sometimes those norms, social facts, those parts of society that we have to deal with because we inherited at birth, sometimes those things put so much pressure on us that our life experiences make us think, my best option is Have you ever thought about suicide as a social issue, like something caused by society, or do we think about it as something caused by like the individual?
I think it's both.
You think it's both? Okay, well, 100 years ago, a little bit more than 100 years ago, when Emil Durkheim was talking about his ideas about how society could result in this, people thought he was crazy. People thought he was crazy.
Bullying and, like, is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, like what are some of the micro level experiences that we know from looking at suicide examples still today in this class, in this world, some of the micro scale examples that we know cause somebody to commit suicide, but back up, and what are the macro scale social issues that could affect that? Yes.
So, a thing I noticed, especially teenagers nowadays, is that recently studies have shown that it's teenagers that are on social media a lot.
So the communication patterns that have changed. And here's I don't want to like shock anybody, but do people always tell the truth on social media?
No.
So, right, because there's social pressures to like make everything seem better than it really is. What do you want to say?
So with the fact that it's a solution to a problem being a macro thing, that the fact that we go towards it, society issues, that means there would be people in the past sitting at that to
Yeah, like,
Okay. Okay. Let me back up and get more. Okay. So, Emil Durkheim made these observations. Yeah. Let me erase this. I'm going to start with this. What time is it? How much time do we have? We have 30 minutes. Okay. Okay, yeah. So then I'm going to skip a whole bunch of space in your notes where this is. And then let me talk to you about this suicide study. This is a good opportunity to bring the macro and the micro together. Okay? So, and we're going to talk about this in a historic perspective at the time when Emil Durkheim was making these conclusions, drawing these conclusions. He had a point of view, a way of interpreting the fact that there was a jump in suicides at a certain time in history. He had a way of interpreting that information that he successfully argued. I can say that he successfully argued because now, more than 100 years ago after he argued, y'all are saying, oh yeah, it absolutely has to do with society. Well, 100 years ago, students in a classroom talking about this would say, it is a mental issue and it's somebody's psychology that does this.
It's something in your brain.
It's something in your brain, something clicks in your brain. That's what somebody would say back then. So Emil Durkheim was like, no, it's a bigger picture than that. If you want to think about Emil Durkheim as somebody who was the first person to successfully use their sociological imagination, you can. That word, sociological imagination, wasn't coined, you know that word, to coin a word, wasn't created, wasn't thought up until much later by another guy. But technically what Emil Durkheim did was use his sociological imagination. Personal experience like suicide, can't get more personal than that. Was it macro scale social structure that the person could have been reacting to? Right? And he made that connection. Yes, ma'am.
I don't think going to like people think it's a personal problem kind of detach themselves from situations so they don't take mental illness as seriously or something to be as
That might be a good approach from like a counseling perspective, but let's look at where Durkheim was coming from when he made these observations first. Okay, so y'all have, I guess I'll erase this part too. So y'all have taken a history, if you haven't taken history in college yet, you've at least had a few semesters of it in high school before, and you undoubtedly have heard of something called the Industrial Revolution. There we go. Okay, so what happened in the Industrial Revolution? Boom in production. That's a good way to put it. Okay, so yes. So the Industrial Revolution changed the way work happened. Factories were built. Things became, there was a factorization, can we say that? A factorization or something of society where factories were built and machines were being built that took the place of human labor. Okay, so that's why it's a revolution because, the nature of work shifted from manual labor for everything to machines doing stuff that manual labor used to have to do. What's manual labor mean? Hands-on, you're using your own, and my grandmother would call it elbow grease. Y'all know that word? Do y'all use that word too? Sure, use your elbow grease. Put some elbow grease in it. Okay? So it shifted from manual labor for everything to machines that took the place of humans. Humans had to build the machines, but that's kind of boring work. The factory setting, I don't know if y'all remember the way your history teacher described it, but it's kind of, it's a boring situation. Like if all of us worked in a tractor factory, for instance, then I would put this gear in the box, and he'd seal the box, and he'd grease the box, and she'd put the wheel. It's like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again daily. It's like not mentally stimulating, nothing. Assembly line. There we go. You're assembling. So by the time we get, what's your name? You. Isaiah. So by the time we get to Isaiah, we've got a whole tractor. But each of us have or we've got 1,700 whole tractors by the end of the month, or however fast we're making them, right? So, okay, so that's what happened in the Industrial Revolution. What's the word revolution mean? Does it sound peaceful? No, it's like turmoil.
Heavily impacted.
Yeah, so it's a revolution. That means things are really changed.
But it changes.
Life really changed.
No, I'm saying that it changes over like a certain time.
Yes, the Industrial Revolution didn't just take 1 month to happen. We basically say, isn't the time frame 1750 to 1850? Does that sound right to y'all? I think in general, it was like a 100-year period, but life changed, work changed. Is that, you said that's right? The 1750 to 1850? Well, not so long ago in the grand scheme of things, but yeah, so it happened pretty quickly. That's actually a pretty quick time frame for life to change as dramatically as it changed. Okay, so this is the time period that Emile Durkheim. This is the time period that Emile Durkheim was looking at. So let's look at social facts about the structure of society from the Industrial Revolution and pre-Industrial Revolution. Okay, let's examine the social facts, because that's what Emile Durkheim did. Okay, we're going to examine the social facts between these two things. Pre-Industrial Revolution, you didn't have huge metropolitan areas where, centers of transport. You didn't have huge train stations that shipped stuff all over the place. You didn't have any of that. You had farming communities, farming or agricultural communities. So if there weren't machines yet to take place of human labor, who was doing the labor on the farms?
People.
You and me. Families, workers, people. People were plowing and picking and planting and all that kind of everything. Harvesting and sorting, and people did work. You were out there with your shovels and your pickaxes and your hoes. We were all out there in the field pulling rocks and turning soil and loosening it up, and we were fertilizing it with cow poop and chicken poop and whatever we could do.
And you got paid for it.
And you got paid for it. You got paid for it. That was your life. Small towns. Because farming, if we're going to feed a whole bunch of people, do we need a whole bunch of land?
Yeah.
We need a whole bunch of land in production. Because especially if you're doing it by hand, it's not like you can, yield a whole, doing stuff by hand, you don't yield nearly as much than if you have a combine out there doing stuff, right? So, okay, so people did the work. There were small towns, close-knit communities. What do I mean by that, close-knit communities?
You knew people. You knew people.
Sometimes almost everybody could be related, but if you weren't related by blood, you were related by. Didn't your grandma? Wasn't your grandma the, the librarian? We know something about you.
I mean, let's consider Camden. Like my grandmother, my great grandmother, and her sister both married two brothers. That's
Yeah.
how it worked. So I'm double related to family.
My family's like that too. We're from Oak Grove, Louisiana, and Wilda, Louisiana before they moved to Oak Grove, and I've got double first cousins.
So everybody in small towns, like everybody are related.
Yeah. Yeah, so you still see some examples of this. So we still have a little bit of like a social reference, I guess, for how life was before. You have small, close-knit communities where everybody knows everybody else. If you grew up a place like that, it probably was a drag for you sometimes in high school because you couldn't get away with anything. But think about this, back up from that micro-level experience of, gosh, what a drag. Everybody knows me, so I can't get away with anything. But zoom out for a second and let's think about the social structure. I've erased the word structure from the board, but that's where functionalism is talking about. Functionalism is talking about the structure of the machine we call society. So even though we're talking about small towns with close-knit communities, this was the macro scale structure. In the macro scale structure, did you need in this kind of picture, do you need a whole bunch of police on the police force?
No.
Why?
Because they do it.
Because if I know you, are you much less likely to do whatever shenanigans you're thinking about while I'm watching? I'm going to see you. I'm going to call. I'll be on the phone with your mother before you get past your neighbor, or your mother's next door neighbor or something. Isn't that Betty's kid? He just did blah blah.
Somebody's
and all the neighbors are going to spank you on the way home, and then you're really going to get it when you get home, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean that's the micro scale example that close-knit community macro scale structure creates. Everybody looks out for everybody else. There's very little crime because you have kind of like an investment in who you're around, and you're scared of the switch, and you're scared of a whooping. And so there might be a sheriff and a deputy, but pretty much what they do is have coffee with you.
Probably the judge too.
Maybe the judge too. Yeah, I mean, who knows? It's a small town, right? Small town community. And when I say that this was the structure of society, you've got these tiny towns with this kind of social description all over the place. Huge population, it's just scattered all over the place. You got sisters marrying brothers, you got family connections. So there's more stability. You're not going to let down the family. You've got economic stability, more likely to have economic stability because you inherit the general store from whatever, or your dad was the dentist and so he's gonna set you up to be the dentist too, right? Like there's like an inheritance kind of the social structure from year after year after year. So everything stays really stable. It might sound boring to you, but there are some really good benefits to that as far as social stability. Crime, really kind of don't have it. Poverty. There's an equality between two of us, but if I know that Amy's family is needy and sometimes her kids don't have shoes, am I going to let that continue in my community that I care about? Pretty much everybody works together, and if Grandma B, who's a widow now, doesn't show up to sit at the front pew at First Baptist Church on Sunday morning like she's done every day for 58 years, are you somebody leaving church right then, knocking on the door to her house, making sure she's okay? Mm-hmm. She's not going to be in her house for 3 weeks bloated and rotting before they smell her to go find her. That's not how it works back then, or in some small communities still today. So this was the social facts. Do you think people are going to commit suicide in large numbers in this kind of social connection?
No.
Not nearly as free. People did commit suicide because, yes, there are instances when the psychology of a person is what's responsible. We don't talk about the psychology of a person in sociology class. Not much. So sure, there were isolated cases of people taking their own lives. And we know that to be true because people kept records. We kept birth and death records, reasons for death. So we know that there were some, not very many, suicides. Fast forward. Let's look at the social facts of the Industrial Revolution. Cities were built. Did you still have your job on the farm?
No.
Where did you have to go if you still needed to eat? You still needed money. You lost jobs, you lost the stable community life. There was no longer a job for you because the farmer you used to work for bought the big plow that somebody invented, that somebody made at a factory. Where are you going to go to eat and work? You have to go wherever the factory is, and in the case of the United States history, up north was the direction you went because that's where the factories were built. But so you moved someplace, not where you know everybody because their grandma was your librarian, not where you have economic stability because we're not going to let Amy's kids' toes stick out of into their shoes or let Miss B rot in her house. Not because of that. Now you're with a whole bunch of people who are in the same situation, but they're strangers. And what are you supposed to do with strangers? Yeah, I mean, think about our behavior today. You might think of yourself, as a really friendly person, but when you're with a whole bunch of strangers, do you exhibit your personality or exert yourself in the same way than if you were with people you were really familiar with? So all of a sudden, you're unhappy about it. Yeah. You would have been very, very pleased if you could have just stayed that way, but now you can't. You're forced to do this. This was not your choice. I'm going to move to the big city. This was your only choice is you're going to eat, you're going to earn money, you're going to support the family back home. You got to move to the big city because that's where the factory is. It's where the work is. Now you got to pay for a place as small of a place as you possibly can so you can send most of your money back to your mom, whatever. And you're living among strangers. Those strangers might have a lot in common with you, but are you necessarily trustful? And there's a lot of, think about like Harry Potter's invisibility cloak. Are there times when we're in public with a whole huge group of people, and because that group of people doesn't know us, we can feel invisible? We can feel like if I do this, nobody will notice because nobody's paying attention to me. It's not necessarily that nobody cares about my well-being, but what about our ideas about privacy? Like, do you want me in your business? In general. Like, we have all these norms that we have to follow. And so when we're put in this great big error, what Emil Durkheim noticed, when he did a secondary analysis. He went to data from hundreds of years before, and he observed that, hey, people committed suicide back here. Crime happened back here sometimes. Murders happened sometimes. But not huge crime statistics. There wasn't a criminal justice field that you could go into to study why crime happened because it just didn't happen that often. The social structure on the macro scale the maze of the social structure, or the matrix like we were talking about, of the social structure, didn't set a person up to really make the choice of crime or be forced to go into crime.
Because you work for yourself and you pretty much, it wasn't a schedule here.
Lots of reasons.
Here you have a boss. You have to listen to somebody. You're being pressured to do things.
And if I'm your boss, I don't have time to talk to you and get to know you. It's just, here's your paycheck, go do your job, and if you don't show up for your job, you know that there are 57,000 other people outside the gates who are waiting for your job, and I'm not going to hold your job for you.
And then here you're being taken care of.
Your society's social structure gives you stability, comfort, a sense of belonging. Here, you might have 17 times as many people each day that you see and interact with, or could interact with. But you've never felt more alone because they're strangers. You don't know about their background. You're not nearly as likely to open up yourself to trust them. Is this because you have a mental instability or a mental condition, or is this just the difference in human interaction based on the shape of the matrix here and the shape of the matrix there? So Emile Durkheim, way before the word sociological imagination was ever coined and used in sociology, he technically used his sociological imagination before anybody else was ready to do it. And he said that the structure of society on the macro scale can affect, the social structure affects the micro scale experiences. Not just suicide, but you can extend this into something like crime that we're talking about. Back home, you would never think to mug her and take her bag. But if you're hungry, if your rent is due, if whatever, and you're walking on the street and there are so many people who don't even know you. I mean, can you describe anybody who walked past you in the hall on the way to class today? Not if they didn't stick out as unusual. And is it a norm to stick out as unusual, or is it a norm to stay within the framework of...
To stay in the framework.
So you're going to try to stay within the framework, not to call attention to yourself. And because you're not calling attention to yourself, it's so much easier just to accidentally like, oh, excuse me. Bump into her, she doesn't even know it's gone. And does she even know who bumped into her? She had glasses and a black t-shirt. Right? So even crime rates can go up when Johnny never would have hurt a flea back here. But same Johnny. And I don't want you to think that Emile Durkheim was observing exactly the same person from here to here. No, he was observing macro-scale social structure, changes to that social structure, and the resulting changes in social data, social information. So you see crime rates go way up. You see poverty rates go way up. You see people dying from starvation. You see suicide rates go way up. All the things that we consider social problems. Depression can go up, alienation, exactly. Your social I'm going to use the word social network, but it means something different when I'm saying it right now than Twitter means, right, or Instagram means. Your social network was way more close-knit. It was there and substantive, and if you were getting depressed, your mama would notice at breakfast, right?
Like those friends on your Facebook where you're actual friends instead of just people
Where that you don't like paint them, but think about why even on Facebook, or if any of y'all are on Facebook or on Instagram, why do we gloss over stuff and send it out? Because still, like we make things seem better than they might be. Oh, I'm not going to post that picture of myself. Well, that picture's reality, honey. I'm going to post this when I look skinnier, or I look taller, or I look more buff, or whatever. That's not reality. So we have this. Okay, so we are post-industrial revolution now, right? We're post-industrial revolution. And people aren't in factories making stuff. They're becoming cosmetologists to do mani-pedis, have a nail spa or something, right? I mean, these are some jobs, too, now that we're dealing with. Or that, are done kind of factory style. So Emile Durkheim, in his suicide study, he used his sociological imagination in much the same way that you need to hone your skills to use your sociological imagination. He came up with functionalism. He said, okay, the social structure is what it is, and it results in certain social conditions. So if the crime rate goes up, we're going to patch it with creating an area of jobs called police, courts, jails, etc. So the crime rate being up is a great thing for the economy because we're going to create jobs like crazy. Poverty rates going up is a great thing because we're going to create jobs like crazy, from social workers that work for agencies that focus on, public welfare to private welfare to all kinds of stuff. Jobs are going to be created like crazy because of these social problems. It's part of the social structure. That's fantastic. Poverty might be terrible on a micro scale for you who's living in it, but it's great for the economy on the macro scale. It's fantastic for the economy on the macro scale, according to functionalism.
So would you say that these two things are hand in hand with each other in a way?
What two things?
The Industrial Revolution and the Pre-Industrial Revolution.
Well, these were hand in hand in his observations.
Okay.
This is he was really the first person who was successful in convincing the rest of the world that society, I erased it, society in general is a thing with rules that we have to live by. Before him, some people might have said, oh yeah, society is a big deal and it has rules that we have to live by. It's a matrix that controls us to a certain extent. Some people might have said that, but the vast majority of people instead said that God is the entity that has the rules that controls what we do or don't do. God rules, controls our behavior. We will follow it, go to heaven. We will not follow it, and we go to the other place. He was the first one really to be successful. People before him had said it, but he was the first one really to be successful in getting people to say, hey, yeah, society is a thing in the same way that God is a thing, and society has rules in the same way that God has rules. And we're supposed to follow those rules of society and fit in and be okay and have a decent, acceptable life. And if we don't follow them, jail, ostracization, suicide, whatever, deviant behavior, being labeled odd or being an outcast or something is how we would be labeled. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else? Are we out of time? We probably are out of time. Almost. Anything else? Questions? Good? Is this good today? Did y'all learn something? Okay.
Yeah.
Always learn something.
Well, good. Well, this is only day 3, but I'm glad to hear that. So I want you to, I want you to learn something every day. But yeah, I hope that this helps you. Like, macro is much bigger than a lot of times you're thinking it is. Much more objective point of view is what I mean by bigger. And micro is, y'all got the micro. Y'all are good on the micro. Okay, so I will see, that's us. Yeah. Okay, so I will see y'all on Wednesday.